Okay. Good afternoon. Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Gemma Gowan. I work in the Changing Futures team in Plymouth City Council. And this is a webinar for us to share learning that we've had so far about what we've called the Three Lens Model, which is a mental health pilot that we've been supporting in Plymouth. So I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. This is a live webinar, and we've got colleagues who have signed up from Plymouth and nationally joining us to learn about this piece of work. So thank you so much, all of you who have joined us. And I know we've still got some people coming in. We'll be recording this for our YouTube channel, so we can spread the learning that we have so far, and so that other interested people, Emma, we can see everything that's on your screen.
Don't worry, I can admit people.
Oh, cool, lovely. Thank you, Katie. So we'll be sharing this on YouTube so that people can revisit it to build on the learning, and in case they weren't able to come along this afternoon. And we're going to ask everyone just to remain muted during the presentations, but there will be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. And if during the webinar, if anyone has any specific feedback for any services or senior leaders or decision makers that might be sensitive, please do reach out to us after the webinar. We can facilitate links for these conversations to take place. The focus of this webinar is on sharing learning to influence practice going forwards. If you do have any questions during the webinar, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll be able to come back to them at the end. And then just a little bit on working together. So this is a learning space. There are no wrong questions and we're all learning together. Is everybody muted? I'm getting a little bit of feedback. So if everyone could just pop themselves on mute, that would be great. Thank you. Do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't already, and if you would like to. And please do what you need to look after yourself during this webinar. We will be talking about themes around mental health, contact with the criminal justice system, homelessness and substance use. So I'm going to hand over to Richard, who's going to do a bit of an introduction for us. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Gemma. Yeah, I'm really thrilled to be here today because this bit of work is really worth sharing. So I'm a general practitioner. I work at Adelaide Street, and as part of that, we work in we have an outreach team that works for people who are homeless, and I particularly worked in a probation clinic and run that for 12 years, where we see people in contact with the criminal justice system. I also work for LiveWell as a part of the Icebreak team as a GP with special interest in mental health, and I'm employed by the university, and part of the time of developing the Three Lens Model has come from some of our kind of university and academic thinking. This webinar is about, for me, it's about sharing two things, both the Three Lens Model and how we piloted it over the last couple of years, with Rachel taking that forward. And so we can think about them together, but also separately. The Three Lens Model was developed, and Gemma coined the term. So well done, Gemma. I really like that phrase. It was developed over a period of a couple of years, 18 months, with some senior experienced practitioners from across the city. And it was in response to thinking that it can be really difficult in mental health as a practitioner, let alone as an individual with lived experience trying to make sense of a system, when we have so many ways of talking about mental health. So we have the diagnostic system, which is quite dominant in how it is used to define who gets what treatment. And for quite a while, there's been a kind of strengths-based approach to working with people that's been around for a while, and then more recently a lot of thinking about trauma-informed work. So we thought it's really tricky when to have practitioners competing and promoting different ways of thinking. So we wanted to bring those together as one model, and that helps us to think about things as a whole. And so the aim was to do some work with practitioners and leaders and come up with a trauma-informed, strengths-based and diagnosis-aligned way of working that both helps practitioners work with individuals, but also should help the system think about what it does differently and what it might do differently. And then secondly, this is about piloting that, and we selected the area of complex needs as a place to pilot it, partly because the Three Lens model was being championed by Changing Futures and the Trauma Informed Network, and as well as practitioners from Live Well and general practice and others around the city from the voluntary sector. So we thought that there are so many practitioners in the city who are doing amazing work with people with complex lives. They might be in substance misuse services, housing services, probation, etc. And what I'd started seeing and really kind of realizing, particularly in my work in probation as a part of the outreach, is that for some people, even though you refer them into services, they're accepted by services, as they're getting most of their mental health work from practitioners who aren't trained in mental health. So there's a lot of resource in the city, but it's not being recognised. Practitioners in probation don't realise they're doing amazing mental health work, and so we thought they need more support to do that well. And so this, to me, is kind of the last piece in the picture, and I'm really proud of Plymouth and Live Well and the Alliance for coming together and saying, you know, we can do this better. We've now got a complex needs team that does some great work with people with dual diagnosis, and now a psychology team as a part of that. We've got the primary care mental health team that's become the assessment and brief and treatment team, who can look after some of those with less severe and less complex problems. And we've got the HIP team, which works with people with homelessness working into the city. But despite all of this, there are still some people who require something a bit different. And so I'm going to leave it there, because I think Rachel will describe really beautifully. And I have to say, you know, the work she's done has gone way beyond what our best hopes were for this project, and you'll see why in a minute. So thanks very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Richard. And just to add a little bit of context around the support that Changing Futures have provided. So the Changing Futures Plymouth programme has been working for the last 3 years across teams, services and systems to improve outcomes for people who have experiences of multiple disadvantage. And the way that we've defined that has been anyone with a combination of experiences around problematic substance use, homelessness, domestic abuse, poor mental health, and contact with the criminal justice system. Emma, is it okay if you could just pop back to the previous slide, please? Thank you, that's lovely. So through Changing Futures, we've supported a number of test and learn pilots over the last 3 years to drive creativity, innovation and learning, and most importantly, system change as a result of those pilots. And this is one of a small series of webinars that we've been creating to share learning about some of the activities that we've been doing in the city. And as Richard said, the learning that we've surfaced over the last few months of having Rachel in post has been incredibly valuable and has potential to really improve how people can access what they need, when they need it, and to improve their individual outcomes. But we're also hearing that It's had a significant impact on the well-being and the resilience and collective support for staff and volunteers that are working with people with complex needs. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel to talk a bit more about the work that she's been doing.
Gemma. Emma, do you mind moving on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So yeah, as Gemma mentioned, the Changing Futures team in Plymouth are working a little bit differently to the other teams in the UK. So we're kind of not here to create a whole new service necessarily. It's just about kind of bolstering up and supporting what is already available in the city. Next slide, please. So as Richard and Gemma spoke about, the Three Lens Model came about to kind of link in with Changing Futures and try to do some of that work. And the main aims are around kind of engagement, developing an understanding jointly with people and the practitioners working with them, and then developing a shared plan. And that is within the lenses of being diagnosis aligned, trauma informed and strengths based. So at the beginning of the pilot, the plan was to work in Harbour Drug and Alcohol Service and the Women's Pod in probation. I think it took a little while longer than anticipated for me to be recruited into post, and by the time we'd started to kind of work with those teams, the landscape had changed slightly. As mentioned, Harbour had had a real boost of kind of psychology input into the team. I think there's now 4 people in the psychology team who were doing quite similar work to kind of what we were hoping to offer. And the probation service also had a similar pilot in from another trust, which meant that they were working with the wider probation team while I was focusing on the women's pod. And as part of the time that I spent in Harbour Drug and Alcohol Service, I spent some time with their really brilliant homeless intervention team who go out doing all sorts of work across the city. And we noticed that whilst Complex Needs had some really brilliant clinics working in the hostels and in the drop-ins, the people who were kind of really quite far away from services that were being seen on the soup run or on, you know, the rough sleeper team outreach, who wouldn't necessarily come to Shekinah or go to, you know, they weren't coming to A&E, they weren't being picked up by emergency services, were kind of being missed. And those teams were, as mentioned before, working with a huge amount of complexity in the people that they were working with who had kind of multiple competing needs. So we decided to expand the pilot into those areas where it felt like perhaps there was a bit more support required. Next slide, please. So originally the pilot was set up to support the workers who were working with people. So a lot of the referrals and requests came in through their workers in homeless street outreach, through their drug and alcohol workers, through probation. But as we kind of spent more time in the communities and got to know people more, we did kind of move into sort of some self-referral with a few people, because people talk, and, you know, I'd go on a soup run or I would be at the drop-in and people would come up and go, "Oh, you're Rachel, I know you from so-and-so. They said you might be able to help me with this." So we did, you know, work with people who maybe identified that they were struggling a bit, you know, more with their mental health than maybe they had told their worker, or maybe their worker had realised. So there was some of that too. We've got a target priority group in the city around people who have been homeless for the longest periods of time. So we also identified some people through that group that could do with some kind of 3 lens formulation work. And, you know, I'm in multi-agency spaces a lot of the time. So, you know, there's lots of different people coming in and out. And if I had a bit of a lull, or, you know, I wasn't doing direct work with somebody else and somebody's housing officer, or, you know, some of the homeless outreach GPs might have wanted a discussion, I spoke to them as well. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, there was an additional pilot that was happening in probation, which meant that I was working solely with the women's pod, which is a much smaller team. So the amount of people that we supported via probation probably was lower, but people tend to stay with probation for much longer. So some of the people that we were kind of doing joint work with, we ended up kind of discussing over months at a time, really. As noted here, that the uptake in Harbour was much lower, because I think, you know, they did feel well supported by the services already in place. But the pilot only started in homelessness in October 2024. So really we've only been there for about 5 months. And as you can see, there was quite a lot of need in those areas. Next slide, please. So thinking about how practically we did this kind of work, I didn't have a fixed caseload necessarily. I worked with the people that, the teams were working with, and that support could be, just for their team if they were wondering about how to frame conversations with somebody or how they might structure a session, or maybe some skills that they might be able to do with that person. That could just be with their support, but ideally I would like to, meet the person with them at least once, because a lot can be missed, without having those direct conversations with people. There was agreement each time that we spoke to anyone together or discussed anybody what the plan would be next, and what the roles were in that for everybody included, including the person. And if the conversations that we had were clinically relevant and the person's kind of already linked in with services or frequently seeing crisis services, then I would record notes via our health system so that people kind of knew what was happening out of hours. And we have a weekly meeting in homelessness, especially to discuss anybody who's currently street homeless. So that was kind of a bit of a safety net to make sure that nothing was being missed, and that any of those kind of like proactive follow-ups that needed to be done were completed by the right people. There was no fixed agenda to the sessions. There wasn't a time slot. There wasn't a meeting place, which I think helped people to feel less pressure necessarily to kind of engage. And, if I didn't see them for a week or two or a session, then that's fine. We just see them again when they come back. The inclusion criteria was homelessness or working with probation services, which meant I did, have the luxury of working with anybody that came along that was already working with those people. And there's no, discharge. If people move out of area for a little while or they go to prison for a little while, we'll just see them again when they come back out. Next slide, please. So again, just thinking a little bit more practically about the work that we were doing, we had joint visits with people that were being worked with by the Three Lens teams, and there was also a lot of time spent in the community. I think that there was a lot to be said for this. There's communities of people that attend the sleep run, there's communities at the drop-ins, there's communities of people who sleep near each other, and although this was focused on individual work, understanding the relationships that happen between different people was really important too. So yeah, it was great to kind of understand a bit more about the wider picture in Plymouth, really. And for those people who were experiencing mental distress and maybe needed a bit more support or different support, we would think about building a bespoke community of people around the person, which is led by the person, and whoever that person kind of wants to be leading on that is chosen by them, which links in quite nicely to the Team Around Me work that's happening in the city at the moment. I'm at a different team every day, so if I wasn't working directly with the team on that day, I would offer advice via email, on a duty service or phone call. And by background, I'm an occupational therapist, so if people needed evidence for kind of health reasons for priority need status or reasonable adjustments to where they were going to go for kind of accommodation, then that's something that I could provide as well via email, as long as we have consent. And for those people that had more of a kind of enduring or more of a significant mental health need, then I would work with the practitioners to navigate the mental health services that are available in Plymouth and advocate for referrals if there were kind of concerns around how the team might work with people. We offered case discussion around developing a shared understanding, and also debrief if there were incidents to kind of have a think about what might have happened and how we can kind of process that, because there's a lot of vicarious trauma in this area, and a lot of people that are working in these services see a lot and hear a lot, and having a space to talk about that has been fed back as being really important. And I provide a lot of advocacy for people experiencing multiple disadvantage in various different forums and meetings and strategy meetings, risk management meetings, etc. And then we've also got the wider kind of picture of changing futures in Plymouth around supervision, workforce development, and the more strategic work that's happening with Live Well to improve pathways into services. as part of the pilot that we've done around kind of workforce development, we've also kind of done a pilot within this pilot to trial rolling out trauma stabilisation training for the teams that I've been working with. So Rowan Burrows is here, who's been leading on that from Pathfinder. So I'm just going to bring her in for a few minutes to give a bit of an overview of how that looks and what the offer is for the wider system.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for your time. So as Rachel said, I'm Rowan Burrows. So I'm the Specialist Change Lead on the Pathfinder Sexual Violence Project in Plymouth. We're covering Devon and Cornwall. It's an NHS England funded project, and it's just about improving outcomes for people really who've experienced childhood sexual abuse and sexual violence trauma. So part of the offer is trauma stabilisation, and there's a huge need in out there, and we have developed a 4-day training program with real life psychology and with DPT that we're trying to kind of roll out across Devon and Cornwall, and focusing in Plymouth just at the just to talk about what we're trying to do here. It kind of follows the Judith Herman model of the 3 stages of trauma, trauma recovery, and there's a lot of work around trauma informed practice, which is great, and this is offering a kind of now what approach, and it's also kind of seen as a kind of preparation for therapy. Often people talk about, oh, you need therapy, but actually getting into therapy is really hard. Doing therapy is really hard. And not everyone wants to do therapy, but they might want it to be better in the here and now. So that's the kind of aim to, going back to Rachel's brilliant slide about bolstering, which I'm blatantly going to pinch at some point. This is about enhancing the skill that's out there, because there's huge amounts of skill and knowledge out there, but actually we need permission to do it. And when we speak to people and we ask, what made the difference, often it's the individual. It's the people I've seen on the soup run. It's that one person that believed in me. It's that, how do we kind of sit with trauma in a kind of different way and acknowledge it, and giving people permission to kind of do that, really. So there's a big workbook that goes along with it. There is like loads of handouts. I think there's 48 different handouts. It's very much an exploration about how we feel about things, how things impact on people, and how we can address that. Lots of grounding techniques, different stabilization things. But some of the feedback we've had is, exactly like Rachel said, there's a huge amount of knowledge, but there's also a huge amount of vicarious trauma. And actually something that's been really useful as part of this training is acknowledging just what people are doing and seeing and working with on a daily basis, and giving people a bit of a space to time and to stop and just acknowledge the impact on themselves. Every time we do it, we learn loads of stuff, and we think it's a really good model. We're looking to kind of land it across Devon and Cornwall as part of the models. There's so much brilliant, hopeful stuff. It's how we can get that system-wide approach to just get people's needs met where they are, really. Keep it really simple, doing the stuff that works well and sustainably. And we're always looking for ways of how we kind of sustain this going forward. Again, we're another project that ends in September. Whilst the Pathfinder stuff is being commissioned, the training, we need to land somewhere. And we're looking at how we can sustainably keep this on a kind of rolling basis, so we can all support each other, learn from each other, and put the skills and knowledge and celebrate those skills and knowledge where it needs to be. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, next slide, please, Emma. So outside of the direct work that we've been doing with people, we've had some real kind of positive change come about as part of the pilot too. So we've had numerous live well services that have been interested in the way that we've been working and offering to embed some of that into their teams. There's been quite significant learning about the target priority group in Plymouth and some of the gaps in provision. I think there's been kind of, from me coming from statutory services into voluntary services, particularly in homelessness, there's been some work around kind of building relationships and understanding the pressures of each other's roles, which I certainly had much less of an understanding of than I thought before I came to work here for the past year. There's been some work happening with the outreach GPs and the hostels and at Shekinah, because a lot of the referrals that go into mental health services come from them. So we've been kind of helping them to understand the mental health system, which has changed a huge amount since the community mental health framework came in, and to really streamline referrals to make things, more effective for the people putting in those referrals and the people on the receiving end of them. We've been doing some work with Plymouth City Council to understand how the kind of priority need evidence is received and health input that might be able to support with that. And I've created a mental health services overview for the people that I've been working with, which is just a really clear kind of guide of which services are available, what they do, and how you access them and how they might link in with other services. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges, some of the teams that we've really hoped to work with haven't been able to embed, you know, some of the flexibility because of pressures and thresholds and criterias, and you know the list is endless, which is, you know, why we wanted to kind of start this pilot in the beginning, really, is because we recognise that there is a gap. The duplicate pilot and probation from the other trust meant that we couldn't quite expand as far as we'd hoped to there. There isn't permanent funding for an assertive outreach role, so this pilot ends in its current form in April, but the next year will be spent trying to kind of share the learning and embed that in the kind of way that Changing Futures as it had envisioned. There's no health trained staff currently based in housing, which I think could help the housing workers and the people who are presenting, so kind of with the quicker access and again more efficiency when people are presenting in crisis. Stepping up Harbour was obviously quite disappointing. However, you know, it sounds like the teams there were kind of feeling quite well supported by what's already available. So that's great. And the initial aims of the pilot just needed a little bit of adjustment. So I think, you know, initially we were thinking a lot more around kind of formulation and debrief and things, but people are really busy. And so we are still doing a lot of that stuff, but we do that in the car between visits, or, you know, when you've got 10 minutes between seeing people. So, yeah. Next slide, please. So moving on to the evaluation, we've got lots of different areas that we're kind of using to evaluate the model. We've got peer researchers who are interviewing some of the service users that we're working with. There's been surveys and focus groups sent out to the people that we're working with and also the wider system. We've sent surveys to mental health services too to understand their kind of staff's view of how they work with people experiencing multiple disadvantage and what, you know, ideas they might have or any barriers that they might kind of be coming up against that, you know, maybe we could look at supporting them with. And then hopefully in the last sort of 6 weeks that I'm going to be in post, we'll be looking at the kind of ripple maps across the city of those more subtle changes that might have happened in the wider system. And hopefully with consent, we'll be able to complete some costed journey maps for some of the people that we've worked with to see if there has been any cost saving elements to the pilot. Next slide, please. So I really wanted to have, you know, the voices of the people that we're working with included in the presentation. Understandably, there's some reluctance from some of the people that we've worked with to have their views recorded or kind of shared in a format like this. So we're kind of working on less formal and kind of, you know, different ways to ensure that they're heard. But from conversations that I've had with people and the staff, there's been some key themes that have come through that people have been happy for me to share here about what helps them when they're experiencing mental distress, you know, when practitioners are working with them. So a big part of that is going to where people are. You know, people often have 5 or 6 appointments in a week, and, you know, if they're not eating well, they're not sleeping well, and they haven't got a lot of access to finances, kind of, you know, traipsing all across the city to see people it just isn't always achievable. Sending appointment reminders, not everybody's going to have a phone, but, you know, again, if you've got kind of information sharing agreements, keeping in contact with chemists, or, you know, the drop-in or the soup run, carrier pigeon if you need to, just some way of kind of reminding people that, you know, they've got one of, like I say, many appointments in a week. There's often ways that we can do that and to help people. Talking to each other. So I'm across so many different services at the moment, and people have spoken about often across those services because people are in touch with lots of different agencies, and there's often so much that's missing between statutory services, voluntary services, and, you know, just context and nuance and sometimes, you know, really important information. So again, you know, we haven't had many difficulties in terms of kind of consent around information sharing in this pilot. A lot of people kind of sign consent forms when they're moving into agencies around information sharing. So, oh, sorry, I don't know if someone's not muted. So yeah, that was just something that comes up quite a lot, really, and also then reduces that repetition, which is spoken about a lot, and again links in quite nicely with the My Story work that's happening in Changing Futures at the moment. These are my words, but just to kind of bring it together around bespoke support. People are individuals, and often we work in places that have strict criteria and guidelines and things, but if we're thinking about human learning systems and working in a more creative way, it might be more time or finance in the beginning, but often we see that kind of works much better for people in the longer term. And services are really stretched, and so what we hear a lot of is that people want people to be honest and realistic about what is achievable, and that then helps people to do what they say that they're going to do, which in turn builds trust and engagement. Feeding back outcomes directly to people comes up quite a lot. Often their worker or somebody else will hear the outcome of an assessment or something before they do, and actually again often we know people don't have phones and things, but it's their business and it's their life, and if we can find ways to kind of share that with them, yeah, it's really important. And what we mentioned again, we obviously in Three Lens we've got the luxury of not discharging people, but those relational approaches and kind of longer term input is really valued, and getting to know people and really sticking with them. And I think just again about reasonable adjustments. I'm an occupational therapist, I go on about this all day, but the Equality Act is there for a reason, and I think that if we can make reasonable adjustments for people in terms of where they're going to stay, they're going to stay there longer, they're not going to be back out. It just makes sense, really. So yeah, next slide please. So this was just some of the information that we received from the mental health services that we asked about their experiences of working with people experiencing multiple disadvantage. So I'll just go through a few of the enablers and barriers. Assertive outreach came up over and over and over again as something that would really help, and all of the things that come with assertive outreach, like the flexibility, low caseloads, time, etc. Multi-agency hubs came through quite a lot, and actually this is something that we've been able to work in through the pilot at Shekinah. There's so many different professionals and agencies that come in there. We can see people together, we can talk, we can share, it just makes things work much better. And positive relationships between voluntary and statutory services, and actually getting to spend time in each other's services and understand more about what each other is doing. And some of the barriers, there was quite a lot of focus around kind of short-term intervention focused work and access to secondary mental health services. Equally, a lot of kind of feedback around low staffing levels and really strict working hours, working 9 to 5s, and information recording systems. I would need to have access to so many information recording systems in this role currently to know what I actually need to know about people. So that comes up a lot too. And I think the most cited barriers to mental health practitioners' knowledge was around homelessness, substance use, and knowledge of what other services offer. And the majority of mainstream services wanted to know a bit more about the Alliance. I think the Alliance works much more with the complex needs team and the health inclusion team, but actually, we are in a really difficult situation England-wide, really, aren't we, with housing? And so a lot of people going into mainstream services now are experiencing multiple disadvantage that isn't just kind of kept within the complex needs team or the health inclusion team. So while we've got this Alliance, it would be great to help them to understand a bit more about what that is too. Next slide, please. So I am going to hand you over to Gemma again now. Our evaluation has been completed by Jane Hall and Sam Fordham, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today. The following is just really the kind of top level themes that have come from some of the focus group surveys, etc. And there is going to be a more detailed evaluation to follow. But I think just to note as well, obviously the Three Lens model is currently just me as a practitioner. So this isn't, it felt like a bit of an evaluation of me at times, like a kind of advisor review. But it is it's kind of, my name's mentioned a lot, but it's the model. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Could I have the next slide, please, Emma? Okay, thank you. So before I share the themes that we have so far from the evaluation as that's coming together, I'm going to invite Hilary to share some of her experiences of working alongside Rachel as the voluntary coordinator of the soup run in Plymouth, and she's also got some feedback to share on behalf of colleagues from Plymouth Access to Housing and Shekinah, who've been working really closely with Rachel as well. So so over to Hilary.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having me along. I coordinate Plymouth Soup Run. I've been involved with Plymouth Soup Run for 20 plus years. I'm going to start by reading the information that we've received from Kerry from Shekinah, which is, as you know, works with the homeless community in the city. And Kerry says, I would like to start by thanking Rachel for the time she has spent with us. Her knowledge, passion for the work she does, her approach with clients and staff alike has been invaluable. As a team, we have learnt so much from her. Rachel was able to engage with people in a soft and gentle way and gain their trust. She listened to what was being said and acted on it, and did not give up until something was done. She made sure the clients were being heard, and the organisations that needed to step up took notice. Rachel didn't just sit behind a desk. She made contact with people, engaged with clients on a personal level, showing humility. With patience, she showed the team here how to overcome obstacles and showed us if one door closed, there was always another door to find that could offer help. Because Rachel is so knowledgeable, she was confident in her battles she faced with other organisations, always having the client's needs at the forefront. Rachel had a natural passion for her work. This included her then going out with the soup run to contact clients out in the evening. This is a rare quality and something that will be greatly missed. Rachel was a constant person and fully understood the importance of clients feeling they felt they could trust and engage with her. And if they didn't, Rachel would source another person that the client would feel comfortable with. As a team, we have learned from her. Clients have benefited from her, and this service and Rachel now being lost will have a huge impact. I would describe Rachel as having a soft, caring, nurturing way with people, with a passion of steel for fighting for what is right and for the best outcomes for people that are unable to fight. She became the voice for people that were not being heard. So that's from Kerry at Shekinah. Very glowing. And Rachel, we were very, very aware of the attributes that you brought in your role. So this is from a soup run perspective now, with some hard thoughts as well. So this was the very first time we have had consistent weekly support from another service. Although I frequently mentioned in meetings that people who are vulnerable and street homeless often need support outside of the regular 9 to 5 working week, and there is a need for flexible working. Services other than PATH, where mainly it's been a person who's come along in a voluntary role, they've never been able to support our work. So a huge thanks to Live Well for supporting Rachel's request to work one evening a week, adjusting her hours so this was possible. That really was huge. It has never happened in the city before. So a huge thank you. Rachel's presence on the run frequently meant she could provide one-to-one support, a listening ear when people were low, vulnerable, or in distress. Also, because she worked across the other services, probation, Shekinah, PATH, Rachel had often met people in a variety of situations, so she had a whole view of people. And as Rachel herself said, People can be at their most vulnerable during the evening, especially knowing a night rough sleeping is ahead of them. Rachel's knowledge of people and her access to the records meant that the following day, after Rachel had been out with us, he was able to contact other professionals involved with the people that she'd spoken to, alert them to the fact that a person was perhaps about to be in a crisis situation. Having followed up any concerns, and Rachel always did it the next day, she would let me know what action had been taken. It was an absolutely superb example of collaborative working between services. During the time the Three Lens Model pilot has been in operation, Rachel's input at the weekly rough sleeper meetings and other meetings, such as creative solutions, has been invaluable. Rachel's been able to provide information on a person's mental health, frequently highlighting their level of need and showing how they did in fact meet threshold for housing duty. As far as I know, there has not been a consistent representation for mental health previously working between probation, Shekinah, PATH and the suit run. The supporting information Rachel has been able to supply meant that some people were able to access accommodation, having previously been told that was not possible and they didn't meet threshold. As well as the support Rachel offered to the people we work with, her support to all of us in our roles, both at Shekinah, PATH and the suit run, has been invaluable. We have learned so much from talking to her. She has informed us of training opportunities and she's provided lists of other support services and agencies working in the mental health field. It's been an absolute privilege to work alongside Rachel. The fact that she agreed to come out once a week in the evening, just amazing. Her knowledge, support, trauma-informed approach and willingness to use her working hours creatively outside of the 9 to 5 role have been invaluable. We will miss her. That's my bit.
Thank you so much, Hilary. It's so lovely to be able to hear from the services that Rachel's been working so closely alongside, and thank you so much for sharing that on behalf of other colleagues as well. Emma, could you move to the next slide, please? So we've had some feedback also from the Women's Pod in probation, who Rachel's been working really closely with, which I'll share on their behalf because I don't believe their colleagues were able to come along and share it this afternoon. As with all of this feedback and with the themes that I'll talk about shortly, there will be an evaluation report in the spring, which will have a lot more detail. So this is just kind of bringing the key themes. Hello, Deborah Coles. I can see you're here. Deborah, do you want me to read this, or would you like to share the feedback? I don't mind, and I'm happy to be led by you.
It's fine. I'm happy to read it if you want me to read it on our behalf. I mean, it was a group effort anyway from all of us, so it would be nice to read it. I'm just going to bear with me 2 minutes. I'm just going to pull it up for you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. It's great that you've been able to come along. Okay.
Apologies, everybody. It's just having so many windows open as we do. Okay, so this is our review of the Three Lens Model pilot service by the Women's Pod Plymouth. So with regards to the Three Lens Model pilot service, has been an essential initiative aimed at improving support for individuals experiencing experiencing mental distress. The model integrates 3 interconnected approaches: diagnosis, trauma-informed, and strength-based, within a person-centred framework. The Women's Pod within probation, which primarily manages women with criminal convictions, but also some men, has directly benefited from this initiative. This review outlines our experience and evaluates the impact of the pilot service on our work and the individuals we support. So by bridging the knowledge gap, prior to the implementation of the Three Lens Model pilot, probation practitioners within the pod had limited knowledge of the healthcare services and mental health conditions, resulting in challenges when managing risk within the community. Rachel, the mental health practice lead, has been an invaluable presence within the probation office, attending weekly sessions to provide expert guidance and bridge the existing knowledge gap. Her contributions have significantly improved our ability to identify and understand mental health needs, allowing us to adapt our practice to be more trauma-informed and health conscious. Rachel's support has also facilitated more effective multi-agency collaboration. Her ability to share vital information has allowed probation practitioners to make informed decisions, leading to better protection for vulnerable individuals. Furthermore, her insight into services accessibility have ensured that those on probation receive the necessary support tailored to their needs. Facilitating access to services. One of the most significant challenges within probation has been a lack of awareness and a lack of access of available services. Rachel has played a critical role in overcoming this barrier by sharing information on existing pathways and making direct links between individuals and relevant support services. This has expanded the support network available to our clients, ensuring they are not left without assistance due to systematic limitations or lack of diagnosis. Unlike conventional approaches that often require a formal diagnosis before action is taken, Rachel has worked proactively to explore the underlying causes of behaviours, fostering a more holistic approach to interventions. This has been particularly beneficial when referring individuals to adults and child social care services, ensuring they receive appropriate support even in the absence of official mental health diagnosis. So multi-agency and collaboration and casework support. Rachel's presence has been invaluable in multi-agency meetings where our expertise has strengthened our ability to advocate for the people we supervise. She has provided critical advice and guidance, helping to ensure that probation practitioners are better equipped to navigate complex mental health and social care systems. In one notable instance, Rachel played an integral role in connecting a probation officer with services that should have been involved in a young vulnerable person's care. This demonstrates the effectiveness of the Three Lens Model in enhancing interagency cooperation and ensuring individuals receive the necessary support. Multiple probation practitioners have echoed similar experiences, all of whom can identify cases where the pilot service has been instrumental in securing appropriate interventions. Professional development and training. Beyond direct client support, Rachel has also contributed to the professional development of probation practitioners by recommending relevant training opportunities. These have been instrumental in increasing our understanding of mental health conditions and improving our ability to work with individuals affected by trauma. By equipping us with additional skills and knowledge, the pilot service has strengthened our ability to deliver effective person-centered interventions. The training has also allowed us to meet our professional and services, enhancing our network. Communications and sustainability. Throughout the pilot, Rachel has consistently demonstrated professionalism, empathy, and effective communication skills. Her ability to liaise between different services has been crucial in breaking down barriers and fostering better cooperation. Her presence has ensured that probation practitioners receive timely support and expert advice, which has directly translated into improved outcomes for the people we supervise. As the pilot comes to an end, we are deeply concerned about the potential impact of losing this vital service. The knowledge, connections, and the support provided by Rachel have become essential components of our practice. Without the contribution of this model, we anticipate significant challenges in maintaining the same level of informed hostelic care for those on probation. So this is our conclusion. The Three Lens Model pilot service has been an overwhelmingly positive initiative with tangible benefits for both probation practitioners and the individuals we support. By integrating diagnostic, trauma-informed and strength-based approaches, the model has provided a more comprehensive and effective framework for understanding and addressing mental health challenges. Rachel's contributions have been invaluable, bridging critical gaps in knowledge, service accessibility, and interagency collaboration. The impact of her work is evident in the improved quality of support provided to those on probation, as well as in the enhanced confidence and the competence of probation practitioners in managing complex mental health needs. The Women's Pod strongly advocates for the continuation and the expansion of this initiative. The loss of this service would be a significant setback, as it has proven to be an essential asset in ensuring fair, trauma-informed and effective support for individuals navigating both the criminal justice and the mental health systems. We extend our gratitude to Rachel and the Three Lens Model pilot for their invaluable contributions and urge decision makers to consider sustaining this critical support system. Thank you again to all those involved. That's it from me.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you. So and you know, just sort of really hearing that concern there as well. And you know, when we set about setting up this pilot a year ago, you know, we didn't know how it was going to go over the next few months. It was something that we were testing out, and to hear today the profound impact that it's made has, you know, really upped commitment and desire to be able to embed this learning in existing services and to create system change and look at how assertive outreach can be embedded more in the city. So thank you, and you know, I hope that sort of later on we'll be talking a little bit about next steps, but there is work happening behind the scenes to make sure that this just doesn't come off a cliff edge, because it has been so valuable and was never intended to be something short term that that would be lovely to have and then it would stop. We wanted to have longevity for sure. Okay, so I'm just going to talk through the key themes that have been created through the evaluation activities that Rachel's described a few minutes ago. So you'll see some data extracts on the screen as I give a brief overview of the themes, and these will be brought together into an evaluation support that will be shared in the spring. But overall, the evaluation data suggests that Rachel's actions provide a holistic and effective approach to supporting individuals with complex needs, emphasising the importance of immediate personalised interventions and system navigation. And these themes speak to the impact that this role has had on services that Rachel's been supporting, and specifically a lot of this data has come from focus groups with Shekinah, the Suprun and Path. So I'll read some summaries for each of these themes, which have been put together by our colleague Jane Horrell from Plymouth University. So the first one is specialist knowledge. Services are valued having a mental health specialist. A lot of the talk centred on Rachel's knowledge, particularly in relation to her openness to sharing that knowledge with other services, knowledge of mental health services and referral routes, including when to challenge decisions, and the importance of having mental health specialist input. And next slide, please. Navigation of services. So Rachel's knowledge means that she can navigate the often complex systems surrounding the access of care for this client group. She works collaboratively with other services and ensures that people are connected to the right support, even when they don't meet specific service criteria. Working across several services has meant that she has a more holistic view of people's needs and the support available and how to access it. Next slide, please. The impact of this role on the support for clients. So Rachel's help goes beyond accessing mental health services, as her holistic approach has also assisted clients in accessing other services and secure accommodation and avoiding hospital admissions. Her ability to effectively communicate the needs of individuals and navigate complex systems is perceived by staff to speed up what they would have been able to achieve without her input. And next slide, please. So unlocking opportunities, and you'll see on this slide there is quite a large extract from one of the focus groups that's talking specifically about someone who had been rough sleeping in a tent for 5 years, and Rachel had been able to describe his needs and have his back, as the practitioner put it, when it came to actually meeting the threshold that was needed for him to be identified as having priority need. And that she was the key to unlocking this person's future. And he is now in self-contained accommodation and is on the road to recovery as a result. So this theme kind of really speaks to that example and some other case studies that have come up through the pilot as well. So Jane has described this theme as Rachel's hands-on, compassionate approach builds strong relationships with those she helps, offering them focused, dedicated time that other services may not be able to provide. Her knowledge and experience have been crucial in making systemic changes and unlocking opportunities for individuals, such as helping someone transition from living in a tent to having independent housing. Next slide, please. Okay. So reaching people, Rachel's approach has centred on building relationships and being physically present with clients and people supporting them. She hasn't been at the end of a referral process, but has been proactively alongside them and able to respond to what is needed. And flexibility has allowed the pilot to shift and adapt and go to where we've identified the most need. Next slide, please. And similar to what Deborah was just saying around enhancing understanding. So Rachel's provided valuable signposting to training, for example, in neurodiversity, which has broadened knowledge and influenced approaches to professional interactions with service users. Her insights have helped staff to better understand client behaviours, leading to more empathetic and effective support. Next slide, please. So the theme of advocacy has come up. So Rachel's input and knowledge has also helped to influence how professionals interact with services. In some cases, this knowledge has increased confidence to challenge decisions and has highlighted the fluidity of referral processes. And next slide, please, for the last theme, which Rachel's mentioned, which was car rides. So services are stretched, people are busy, and prioritising time to access support for staff can be hard. So the initial more formal offers that we considered at the start of this pilot weren't being taken up, but car rides have come up over and over in the evaluation feedback as a space to have really meaningful conversations while driving between visits. Okay. Next slide, please. And I'm going to just kind of summarise with a quote from one of our partners before handing back over to Rachel. So, outreach mental health has proven to be possible, and with evidenced outcomes too. A number of rough sleepers would not be spending Christmas indoors this year if it had not been for Rachel's work these last 6 months. A massive thank you to Rachel. This is a direct result of your hard work and persistence to bridge the gaps in the system that does not work for all rough sleepers. For some, this will be their first Christmas indoors for many years. Okay, and over to Rachel to talk about future plans and what next.
Yeah, so as mentioned earlier, the pilot ends in April, so I'm going to be spending the next 6 weeks thinking about how we can kind of share the learning and think about how this kind of continues, really. So Changing Futures are planning to complete some project work with some identified teams in the city to embed the learning over the next year. And I think that will link in quite nicely with the team around me work that's happening too, so quite a lot of similarities with that. I'll be completing the evaluation report, which will be finalised in April to share the learning. And on the back of some of the on the back of the unfortunate Nottingham incident, there's going to be an assertive outreach working group in Plymouth again that hopefully we'll be linking in with. I'll be attending that monthly to think about how we might work differently with people, particularly people who are street homeless. And because of the feedback that we had from both practitioners in homelessness services and mental health practitioners about gaps in knowledge for both of them, we've had some volunteers to develop a kind of mental health and homelessness skill share across the Alliance, which will happen every couple of months to think about, you know, how services might have changed and how things work. And also around kind of embedding the Alliance ethos into mental health services inductions, because, you know, as mentioned, there's quite close working links with the kind of teams in the complex life system, but actually the kind of wider mental health services likely would, you know, work quite well in the Alliance too. Dr. Bing is going to continue to provide his clinic at Plymouth Probation Service, so that there's something ongoing there, and kind of embedding some of the kind of ways of the Three Lens model into that. And the Health Inclusion Plymouth Pathway team have offered to provide a duty function to Plymouth City Council's homelessness outreach housing officers to offer that kind of maybe sometimes quicker access to evidence for priority needs status, which can take a little while to come through sometimes. The complex needs team are going to embed some of the learning from Three Lens into their current clinics and offer a supportive duty function for people who are street homeless as well. And Rowan and I are hoping to join up to think about the learning from her pilot in Devon Partnership Trust last year about improving access to mental health services for people who are homeless. So, I can't say so go on slides. Thanks, Emma. So that's it. So I don't know if anyone's got any questions, but thank you all for coming.
Thank you. I don't know if we had any questions in the chat.
So there's some comments, but not
yeah,
not questions in particular.
Okay, and lovely, and thank you for all your comments and introductions. John, we'll come to you first.
Ever not. Thank you for the presentation. Really excellent to hear about the work that's been undertaken across so many organisations and the impact that it's making. In one of the earlier slides, there was reference to sort of costing of client pathways and journeys, the interventions they'd had. I mean, is that information already available, or is that going to form part of the kind of final report that's being put together?
So I think Changing Futures have completed some costed journey maps for people already, but yeah, for the people that I've been working with, that will come together as part of the final evaluation.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And those evaluations are, I think, a really interesting, innovative way of looking at cost effectiveness, because normal cost effectiveness studies aren't so helpful for this kind of pilot, but you can get a sense of what might be and what might have been different from those detailed pathways where you really think about the costs. So I think that's so helpful for this kind of work.
Any other questions?
I'm not going to miss an opportunity when I've got so many good people in the room, honestly. So as part of what you were saying, you were talking about the development of an approach across Cornwall and Devon. You know, so really expanding what's been developed through the pilot here and kind of aligned other, you know, pilots, the overlapping element of other pilots. What would it take to try and deliver a service like this across the peninsula?
Richard, you had some thoughts about that earlier in the week. I don't know if you want to share or you want me to take this one.
Well, why don't you talk a little bit about the detail of what it might look like, and I'll come in after.
Yeah, okay. So I think, yeah, when we've thought about it kind of Plymouth specific, it's kind of, you know, is that something that could be embedded into other services that are already available? Is that something that we could kind of, you know, in the team that I was in previously, I was a substance use link. So could we have people that are kind of link workers in CMHTs, things like that, that can kind of have a bit more time to provide this work to the voluntary sector? So Rowan, I don't know if you wanted to say something, but Rowan's pilot kind of worked very much on that basis of those kind of relational approaches and using the resource that is, you know, available currently in mental health services to do something a little bit different.
I think it's really tricky. I think there needs to be an investment. That's the problem, isn't it? And I think this is the big thing. And you know, Rachel and I have talked a lot about this. I feel like I've kind of seen it from a distance, but this has really, really hit home for me. You know, my project was around improving access to mental health services for rough sleepers in South Hams, Teignbridge and West Devon. We never got a shorter title than that. And it was trying to look at building those links, and those links weren't there. And there was the kind of, we got so far, but then there's those organisational kind of blockers, and then the time runs out. And this is the kind of problem. And I sat at the Inclusion Health Framework meeting across Devon, and my brain's ticking, saying we need to get it there. And there was conversations at a mental health, learning disability, neurodiversity provider collaborative level about where the monies come from. You know, who's got those monies? And it's not there. I'm not entirely sure where it is, but I'm on the hunt for where it is, you know, and it needs to be in Inclusion Health. And can we just sign up to something? How many times do we need to demonstrate what works? It's the people, it's the relationship. Your feedback, Rachel, is amazing. It's groundbreaking, yet we know it already. And the gift is the person, the gift is the individual, and that flexibility. And I think the savings are massive. When I started off my project, they were doing the journey mapping, but without the costings. And that's the bit we couldn't get on board. And it's if we can get those costings and put them in the right place. That's my feeling. But I'm very much kind of learning, because it's a very complicated system. It's a very complicated system. I'm worried that another amazing project is going to go by the by. But it's very important that we make sure that this learning is continued, is shared. We're another voice together with a number of different projects. There's your evidence. Here's the way of doing it. And here's a potential solution. What do you think? And taking it into those right spaces. I've probably waffled a little bit. What do you think, Richard?
I think you've both, you know, hit the nail on the head in many ways. And I mean, I'll take a kind of slightly more structural, academic and economic viewpoint as well. And I think that the bit about senior decision making is really key, and where the money is. We're not going to get more money into the whole mental health system. So it does require commitment to move resources, and resources can be moved in two ways, I think. And it's helpful to distinguish resource moves where you allow people who are in a team to do things differently. Not just allow, but encourage and support, and even say, this is your job, and supervise people to do something differently. So I was at the Open Dialogue conference yesterday. This is completely in line with Open Dialogue as an approach. So if mental health services want to shift towards that way of working, where everything's about relationships with the individual. And in this pilot, there's a relationship between the individual and the support worker who's there with them already. There's the relationship between an outreach mental health worker who's going out, sometimes supporting the individual, but often mainly supporting the worker. And then there's the relationship between that person and all the teams they're working with. That needs a lot of curation and building. And then the relationship with the wider system saying, yeah, this is what we want to do. And at that level, there's a kind of number of things that need to happen. There's not only there might need to be a commitment to say, actually, we need a team of people like Rachel who do this. It's not a big, that's not a huge, doesn't have to be a huge investment, because most of the work is in shifting the practices of people in existing jobs. Whether they're the support workers who are saying, yeah, we will take this supervision and support from a mental health expert, or other practitioners in other teams who will liaise with this person and say, or go the extra mile and do something slightly different in their team so that they can be brought into traditional existing mental health teams. But there might need to be a bit of investment, so one of the teams might need to take responsibility for doing this function. And Rachel's been on her own, and we talked about it. Probably you need two people at least who are doing this together, because this is complex, difficult work. And so that kind of support and supervision and endorsement. And then there's something about risk. When we're doing this kind of work, it's less about an assessment. You're not doing an assessment in the traditional way. You're doing an assessment in a human way alongside people. And you might just see someone for 5 minutes. You've got to do an assessment of that. And that's got to be allowable and thought of as a good thing, rather than something that has to be undercover. So all of the workarounds that great workers do need to be endorsed as good work and good practice. And then to hold that risk at an organizational level, you need the senior people to be saying, yeah, we think it's right that our mental health workers should be doing this kind of work. It's a bit, it might look a bit dangerous, because you're going to take on people into your mental health trust who might have bad things happen to them, who might do bad things. And that needs to be agreed at a board level, that you're going to do that. And sometimes you need to work with the coroner and say, we're going to do this because overall we think this is safer for everybody, safer for the person, safer for the population. And we're going to agree to do this, even though there may be an event that is not very comfortable that happens on our watch. So there's a set. And then lastly, I just add about evaluation and context. We're doing some work in the university looking at the literature around this, and to try and understand where this is happening in other places and what we would call these things. So what are the key functions that Rachel has laid out so clearly that she has done, these 6 practices? How would we describe those from the literature? So try to bring the two together and say, these are the functions that need to happen in this role, and we need to support you and supervise you to do these, and learn as we go. Because when you're doing this in a complex system, you have to understand the context in which you're working. If you don't, you can't just move these things to one other context, but you can have a set of consistent functions that generally we know need to happen, and make sure those functions happen in the context that you're landing in, and evaluate as you go. So the link between reflective practice and